you've bought your Tyranids, Termagants and Ripper Swarm paint set, and you're ready to venture into the world of Warhammer 40,000. Painting Warhammer is fun and rewarding, and we're here to walk you through each stage of the process. Before we start painting, you need to build your miniatures. You'll see on the back of the box that there are some instructions on how to build your models. To help you out with building, have a look at our Painting Essentials Your Mini video for some top tips. You'll also need to gather a few things before you start. To paint miniatures, you'll need a water pot and some paper towel, and something to use as a palette. The plastic tray in the box is great for this. If you'd like to learn more about setting up a painting area, we've got a handy video filled with helpful information. The paints we've used in this guide are the ones found in the box set, and they are listed on the screen now. We're using the paints in the set to replicate the images of the miniatures on the box art. It's also a good idea to keep your box to hand while you're painting, as you can use it to refer back if you're unsure which parts to paint in what colours. We'll be painting these Termagants and Ripper Swarm in the classic cream and purple scheme of High Fleet Leviathan. However, remember that these are your miniatures. You don't have to stick to the box art colours. Feel free to let your imagination run wild. The first thing we'll be doing is something called an undercoat, and for this we'll be using our pot of Wraithbone to do this. Don't worry if you've not heard of undercoating before, we'll be talking you through it. So what is an undercoat? This is where we apply a paint to the whole model, and then this acts as a foundation for all our other paints to stick to. There are two ways to do this: using a spray can or by using the paint from the pot. In this case we'll be painting it from the pot of Wraithbone, as this is what we get in the set. It's normal for the paint to settle and separate in the pot over time, so give it a good shake until it's a smooth, even colour. Break the seal and push the lid until it clicks into the tab at the back, to help keep the pot open while you use it. Wet your starter brush from the set with a little bit of water, then wipe any excess away on a paper towel, so it's damp but not sodden. Then we can load up the bristles with a little bit of paint from the reservoir inside the lid. Take care not to get the paint all the way up to the metal part of the brush, which is called the ferrule, as this can damage the brush as it dries. Just about halfway up the bristles is plenty of paint. You can learn more about this technique in our thinning paints video. Thinning our paints gives us the ability to avoid creating lumps and obscuring the smallest of details on our models. But we do want to be careful that we don't thin it too much, or the paint will just slip off the model. Thinning our paints creates a smoother consistency which can be applied in several thin coats to a miniature. This might seem to take a little longer, but it will give you a much better end result. You'll see that these miniatures are packed full of detail. If we apply one thick coat of paint, we risk clogging up all that awesome detail. We can avoid this by applying a couple of thin layers instead. This ensures we still get to see all that detail and we get a smooth finish. You can be really messy at this stage. Just make sure that you get the Wraithbone into every little nook and cranny and flat surface. You'll notice that the first coat might seem to struggle to stick to the plastic, but don't worry, just keep going and cover as much as you can. You'll need to leave the first coat to dry for around 15 minutes, which gives you plenty of time to start undercoating the rest of your models. Once it's dry, apply a second coat in exactly the same way. You'll find that the coverage of the paint is much better this time round. Then when that's dry, you can apply a third coat. The end result should look something like this, with the model covered evenly with Wraithbone for the skin. Well done, you just undercoated your first models. Once we're happy with our undercoat, we can apply Magos Purple to some small details on the model, just to break up that cream skin. Magos Purple is a contrast paint. These are paints that are really thin in the pot, but are super pigmented. When you use these paints, they apply a colour to the whole area, but also shade the recesses and slightly pull away from the edges. This gives you a model that already looks really great, giving the illusion of shadows and highlights in one colour. To use them, we'll give the pot a good shake, as the paint after a while will separate in the pot and settle. Then we can open the pot, push it back so the tab clicks in place. Take your brush and dip it into the reservoir in the lid, or you can carefully dip it into the pot if you need more paint. Once you have enough on your brush, you can apply it to the little details on the Termagants and Rippers, one by one. We want to make sure that this colour gets into the joints of the legs and arms. There are also a lot of little details that we also need to pick out, like little vents, piping, eyes, mouth, and the tongue if it's poking out. As you keep adding more contrast to the model and move it around, we want to make sure that we aren't adding so much that the wet contrast paint starts to pool in areas. If it does start to pool, you can remove some of the wet contrast by drying off your brush and soaking away the paint. Once you're happy with your contrast colour, leave it to dry fully. This may take about 5 to 10 minutes depending on how much paint you applied. Next up is Thunderhawk Blue, and we'll be applying this to the hooves, claws and the gun carapace. Thunderhawk Blue is a layer paint. These are paints that are slightly thinner and lighter in colour than base paints, making them great for building up brighter colours and adding highlights to the edges and top of models. Even though these paints are thinner, they can also be thinned down like our base paints, with a small amount of water. This just makes sure we apply multiple thinner coats to build up the colour. Painting multiple coats will seem quicker when you're applying them in an assembly line across all your models. Once that last model is painted with your first coat, your first model should be dry. Then you can start your second coats. You can also use layer paints in the same way as base paints. You may just find you need an extra coat to get that solid coverage. To learn more about layer paints, check out the video in our Painting Essentials playlist. And if you ever find your brush losing its point, just roll it on the palette again to get those bristles behaving again. Remember to wait for the blue to dry before moving on to our next stage. And don't forget you can be painting your other miniatures while you're waiting for your paint to dry. Doing this will have them all done before you know it. Once the blue is completely dry, then we can move on to the carapace armour. For these areas we'll be using Nagaroth Night. When applying this, thin it down with a little bit of water just like we did before. It will probably take 2 thinner coats to achieve complete coverage. Painting in all of the main colours really helps the model come to life, but it also defines areas of the model nicely. We want to be as neat as we can here, as this will give us a much better end result and save us time so we don't have to do as much tidying up with Wraithbone. However, if you do get any of this colour on the wrong areas, just take your Wraithbone to tidy up. Don't forget to thin it down with water though, as the more layers of paint that we apply to the model, the more we risk creating lumps and bumps if those are thick. Thinner layers are a super easy way to get that smoother finish we want. Now the paint water is looking a bit dark and dirty, so we'll change that now for some clean water. This really helps keep your brushes in good condition. Now we're going to use Corax White to paint the teeth on our models. As you can see, there are some of the areas we need to paint that are very close to the purple and cream colours, so try and be as neat as you can. But if you do make any mistakes, it'll be super fast to tidy up. Just wait for the white to fully dry, then you can use a small amount of Wraithbone or Magos Purple to fix the affected areas. But because those areas are so light, they will only need 1 thin coat. After a few layers of Corax White, the teeth should be fully covered and looking nice and sharp. Well done, your termagant is now ready for battle. If you want to stop here, you absolutely can. They are more than ready to devour space marines and wreak havoc. However, if you'd like to learn more about using the rest of the paints included in your set, keep watching. The final paint we'll be using is Armageddon Dust, and we'll be applying this to the base. Armageddon Dust is a type of technical paint. This is a range of Citadel paints created for basing and to add all sorts of effects to your miniatures. We've got a video all about technical paints if you'd like to go and see more about them in action. This particular one is designed to be used on the base to create a textured sand effect. Basing a miniature really helps to finish it off and brings the whole thing to life. We tend to do it last to finish off the whole painting process, but some people prefer to base their miniatures earlier or even at the start of the process. To apply this, we're going to show you 3 different methods depending on the tools you have available. Technical paints like Armageddon Dust can be tough to get off your brushes, so we don't want to use the brush included in the kit, as it's likely to get ruined in the process. First, we have the Citadel Texture Tool, which you can buy from the Games Workshop website or in one of our Warhammer stores. This is the quickest and easiest way to apply technical paints onto bases, as it's specially designed for the job. It's a plastic tool with 2 scoops on it, 1 large and 1 small. We'll use the large end of the scoop to get the paint out of the pot and apply it to the base. The small end is really helpful when it comes to getting the paint around the Tyranids' hooves. If you can, try and avoid getting any Armageddon Dust on the miniature itself, or on the rim of the base. Just a little around the hooves will help tie the model and the base together really well. If you don't have the texture tool, there are 2 more options you can use. The second method is to use a wooden coffee stirrer. We'll just scoop the paint and apply it to the base. It'll take a while as it's quite small, but it's a great option if you don't have the texture tool. Or alternatively, you can fashion a tool from the plastic tray the models and the paint came in. Technical paints take around an hour to dry, so leave them to dry in a safe place, and they'll be ready in no time at all. Congratulations, your first Termagants and Ripper Swarm are now complete. They are ready to face the forces of the Imperium and consume the worlds of Warhammer 40,000. For more tutorials, tips and tricks, check out citadelcolor.com or head to your local Warhammer store where our amazing staff would be happy to help you. Well, we hope you enjoyed this video and we'll see you next time. Bye bye!